things. So good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to ADBCC. Oh my gosh, I love to say television. You know I say that every single day. ADBCC, a different book list, the People's Residence. And you know we are located at 7, I could hear you say it, 7, yes, say it a little louder, 7 Bathurst Street. Oh, you guys are so well trained. And you know, you can't come to us as a destination. So it is wonderful that we can bring the programming and the content of ADBC Cultural Center into the comfort of your home. And I have been having a fabulous time interviewing all kinds of people, game changers, cool people from all across the world. Now, I gotta tell you a little something about today. Today, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I am going to interview 2 people. Now, you know, when you grow up, your mother always say, you can't fly in the face of God, girl. Oh my gosh. So today, I have the opportunity of interviewing journalists. Just imagine that. People who sit in this chair most of their lives, interviewing people from all over the world, finding out the cool things about them, what they're about. And today now, I am honored to have that privilege to interview two journalists. So, you know, I'm a little, nervous about it. My heart beating fast, but I look hot, you know. And I know you're thinking, who are those 2 people that I am so excited about? And who are those journalists that has such great bragging rights that she can't shut up? She better just bring on those journalists. And so, good people, I am very pleased to welcome Cynthia Reyes and Hamlin Grange to this podcast this afternoon. And as you know, there are Trailblazers, not in the city of Toronto. Ooh, that would just diminish their work. But they're Trailblazers in journalism and in communication here in Canada. Hamlin Grange, former journalist with CBC and Anchor, and now he's also the founder and is responsible for diversity and inclusion. He's a diversity and inclusion strategist, and he is busy involved in doing that. And also too, he's also going to share with you some of also the things that he is involved with in his home. And also to join in us is none other than Cynthia Reyes. And as you know, Cynthia herself is a journalist. She's an author of several books. She's a passionate gardener, and she always brings the life of the gardening in her work as she continues to bring us book after book. So Hamlin and Cynthia, a very warm welcome to you here at the People's Residence, ADBCC. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna say it again. TV.
Thank you.
Hi, Aisha. It was great. Great. What a great introduction, eh?
It's a great introduction.
Jeez, I tell you, you missed your calling, girl.
We can't possibly live up to that.
I know.
I mean, like, hello, world. Every day, my mother says, you should have done this. And I say, her, girl, I am too old for this now. I am just having fun with speaking to great people and finding out what they're doing. So we are in this time, a very challenging time, a new world that we live in. And the beauty about living in challenges and in difficulty, such creativity can come out of it. Whenever I think of COVID, I think about people who came through the Middle Passage, and people went to a place called the Caribbean or the West Indies. They had multiple languages, and out of that came languages that they created. They created nation states. And so we've got these examples in history where we have been challenged as humanity, but we were able to create a new world. And so I am looking forward to the post-COVID period, where the things we can imagine, the things that we can innovate, the possibilities that exist, I am looking forward to all of that. So tell me, how are you experiencing COVID, and what are some of the thoughts that go through your minds in what you have seen in life, and what you would compare those things with the period that we are in right now? I'm going to open up with that.
Sure. Wow. Well, maybe I can jump in, because I think you're so right, Aisha. You know, this COVID-19, this pandemic, I think it's really important for us to take the big picture, to get a big picture in all of this, okay? Because yes, we can get bogged down in the detail in terms of how many, older Canadians and old people have died and where they've died in nursing homes. That's a tragedy. We can get bogged down with the rising incidence of racism against East Asian and Asian people. What's happening in China towards African immigrants is deplorable. In India, anti-Muslim attitudes, Hindus against Muslims. Those are the details. I think it's really important, however, for us to take a bigger picture. And I think you're absolutely right when you talk about that in your earlier statement. We need to take a bigger picture on this stuff, because there are some tremendous opportunities that this pandemic, I think, is opening up for us. And I think we need to embrace those opportunities, whether it's being more mindful of each other, and also the use of technology is another way to look at it. The whole notion of creativity. This is going to force us to be more creative in terms of what we do and how we go about doing it. So I'm not ignoring the details, don't get me wrong, but I think it's really important for us to have a bigger picture in terms of what this all means for us as people, and also as Black people living in the Black diaspora around the world. I think it's really important for us. Those are my thoughts. What do you think, Cynthia?
Yeah.
Well, I've had a chance up close to watch you working from home exclusively now, and to watch you figuring out how your business changes, right? You deal a lot in cultural competence and skills around inclusion and how to build inclusive teams that serve an audience or a market or a community. And it's been really interesting watching you and the excitement that you bring. You've been having all these Zoom calls and all these telephone calls and so on. And the excitement that I sense in you as you think about how to adjust parts of your business, because you're used to doing often very close-up, personal, confidential work with executives of large and small and medium-sized companies, and with team members and managers. So how do you make that work? And that's been quite exciting for me to watch you with that. It's funny, I write books and I teach writing, and I've done almost none of that myself in this time. I actually am doing things on a level that is it's very person to person. So I make sure once a week that I call one of the oldest people in our churches who lives alone. And I make sure that I call to say, how are you doing? And, is there anything, or just to talk, not just to offer help, but just to talk with them, because older people often get lonely and to not see any of their relatives. So that for me has been really important. Also, I'm cooking. Like Ita, you probably remember that I'm the world's worst cook. That skill, I think I was up in a tree or on a rooftop as a child reading a book when my mother was cooking and all my siblings were learning. I learned nothing about cooking. And thank God I married a man who's a wonderful chef, because I would have starved all these years and the kids would have starved. I am cooking. Okay.
And some good stuff as
and
well.
baking cornbread, girl. My cornbread is
diet.
good,
Really
right?
good.
And I am cooking all kinds of plant-based and vegetarian meals, and it's turning out surprisingly quite well.
I'm still here.
Well, I keep saying it's COVID-19. And I feel like I have 10 pounds of the 19. I really don't want to get to the 19 pounds of COVID.
Okay, all right. I am spending time with our granddaughter, who is a total delight. Yeah. She is going to be 7 months old next week.
7 months, that's right. Yeah.
And it's like every week, if not every day, she's doing something new. And we'd forgotten, like we're getting old now, okay? So we'd forgotten what it was like to have a baby and watch them sort of growing before your very eyes. And she's just delightful. And so
She is, yeah.
it just brightens up our day. We've been lucky. We invited our daughter and son-in-law to come and spend this time with us. And they came just before the lockdown. And so we actually have family here.
Yeah.
And so we've played Scrabble, which I call squabble, because people are always trying to make up new words that don't exist in the Scrabble dictionary.
My daughter is a genius at that.
We have dinner together every day, you know. It's and now the garden. I mean, wow! We've both been out in the garden a lot, right?
Spend a lot more time in the garden this spring because I'm here, right? So you know, we're prepping the beds, making some changes, and also reimagining what the garden will look like in the fall, because I think I'm going to move things around. So we'll see. Yeah, it's been a very productive time for us.
Now, you know, you've touched on so many things. I particularly like the fact that you mentioned you call the senior to have a conversation, to say, how you doing? As opposed to, do you need help? I'm so mindful that seniors right now, you know, my mother is 87, she lives with us, and they turn on the news. And sometimes one day I became so conscious that she was just listening to things about death and dying and people. And I'm thinking, oh my God, she must be upstairs panicking, you know? So seniors also too need to feel that they're valuable and they're needed and they can contribute. And that we are conversing with them as human beings, not as people that, oh my God, you're a vulnerable group, so we got to be really nice with you or handled you like glass. So it is good that you reach out to her in COVID or not COVID time. If we have that habit of just picking up the phone to say to people who live alone, how you doing? You know, in our minds and our hearts, we make those commitments, but you know, sometimes life gets in the way, we never follow through. So that's a really important thing to say to people. Just pick up the phone. You don't have to approach seniors from the point of view, I have to go take care of you, but we can approach them from the point of view of, and this is the final thing that you said in that segment right there, is that family. People have become so conscious of family. I mean, I know there are probably some people who probably hate their family in COVID, but what COVID has taught you is you got to love your family, right? I became very conscious today that I heard my neighbor's children playing in the backyard. I don't have that privilege. I'm not home in the day and they're at school. But suddenly I thought, these kids are like almost 7. For the first time, I am conscious of them playing in the backyard. That's how fast our lives were moving. That's how fast we were going as a planet. So here's the thing. And one of the other things too, one of the things that I love is that whenever I see people in their interviews, there are always books in the background. Yay to books, yay to books. Books are champion code. I gotta tell you that, right? Some people even curate the books behind them because books have such importance.
Did you happen to see that ours are color coded, my dear?
I did have that little tiny note.
That's not me. That's not me. My daughter did that. But it's another story. It's another story.
You know, but sometimes, you know, people come into bookstores and they say things like, you remember the red book and the pink book? And, you know, they think like, oh my gosh, I need to know this. So I did note that. But it is just, in this time, we see the importance of books and the importance of how valuable they are to people, that they become the backdrop in their lives. Now you've been journalists and you've been a journalist and you are a journalist, Cynthia, because I don't believe when people say, you know, this person was an educator. No, if you are an educator, you're always an educator. You're a journalist, you're always a journalist. And for those two who are tuning in and thinking, what is happening at this moment here at ADBCC? I'm in conversation with Cynthia Reyes and Hamlin, Grange. And as you know, Cynthia is the author of A Good Home, An Honest House, Myrtle, the Purple Turtle, and of course, Twigs in My Hair. So here you are as journalist and you brought news to the world. But then Cynthia, you made a decision that now I'm going to document. I'm going to write. I'm going to have this book that even in a period like this, it's probably going to be a tool that will be valuable. People will hug it more, but people will find books to be their friends in a period where we can't go out and socialize. What brought you to that moment where you thought, I'm going to record my thoughts for history?
Right. So the first of all, so I'm still, you're right, I'm still journaling in that part of journalism, in that I have a blog, but I never stopped writing, even when I was on television or I had the big jobs traveling all over the world, improving the state of television. I was writing memoir stories about our lives and about our family and our home, whatever home we lived in at the time. And so after I had an accident that injured me from head to toe, and because of that accident, I went through a period of years that were really, really rough. And Hamlin, being concerned about the state I was in, actually went and looked for the stories that I had written, and found them in old bags and boxes falling apart, you know, and brought them to me one by one and said, you should read this. You really should read this. And it was kind of shocking to me that I had written these stories and written them really well and very descriptively. I was documenting the details of a family's life, and of a family's home, and how they interacted with their house and their garden and the woods and the neighbors and all that. And so a few of those stories, to make a long story a bit longer, few of those stories, after Hamlin found them, got published in a magazine. The magazine editor heard about them, asked if she could publish a few of those stories. They were published. Readers started asking, does she have a book? Well, I didn't have a book, but I had a lot of stories. I had dozens and dozens of these stories, and worked with the first of 3 editors to put them together into a book called A Good Home. And it might seem strange to you to hear this. I didn't realize that I had been writing about home in its smallest essence, its smallest meaning, as in, you know, a flower or a chair, or how a ray of light hit the table in the dining room. Or I didn't know that I was writing that. I didn't know that I was writing about home in the sense of the big sense as well, homeland, and how we connect to our homeland, whether it's country or the country of your birth. And anyway, so I didn't know that, but it was put together with the help of professional editors into a book. It's the term A Good Home has a secondary meaning, because only after we had put it all together did I realize that all these stories had to do with inclusion and exclusion. And there's the quintessential story that describes that in A Good Home is a story where a young woman, a beautiful young woman in our little village, at the last moment, her wedding, she was jilted. She did not marry the guy she loved because his family considered her to not come from a good home. And so if you read the story, I think if you read the stories in A Good Home the first time, you probably will be struck by just how interesting and unique all these homes are, and the people that I interact with in each home. But if you read it again, you'll notice that a lot of that book is about how we include and exclude people that we consider to be of value or of no value to us. So that's how A Good Home came to be written. And then An Honest House was written later. And Twigs in My Hair was written 5 years ago. As you may remember, Hamlin got ill 5 years ago, and I was waiting for the photographs from Hamlin, because to me, we produced this book together. He's responsible for the pictures, I'm responsible for the words. He tells stories through his pictures, I tell stories through my words. And I wanted to wait until he had not only fully recovered, but also had a bit of time on his hands to work with me in collaboration to put these elements of the story together, and that became Twigs in My Hair, which was published late last year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, fantastic. I read A Good Home, and it's funny that never struck me before, but as you were talking, I remember when I went to live in the Caribbean, and it would be commonplace for people to say, "Who your mother?" Yeah,
Yes.
you come from a good home. Yeah,
Yeah.
then people come from a good home, and so you reminded me that was so very much too part of the language of people making that inquiry. You brought home somebody, you know, a partner, a boyfriend, whatever, and people say like, "He come from a good home," you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And I also observe in that book that a lot of the what I would call indigenous knowledge, the sayings of the time. I think it was your aunt or one of your family members. But as the older you got in life, those things resonated with you. The meaning of those things, the double entendre of those things, all those things. I saw that flow through the book.
It's interesting because a reader suggested that I should create a mini book of just my mother's and my grandmother's sayings. Because they were so powerful. And again, that's another thing I didn't realize until the book was put together, that the storytelling was just peppered and uplifted by all these sayings that come to us. I imagine some of them from Africa, some from Britain, some from wherever, that became part of our family life that had meaning to,
Yes.
to us.
And that's so true, because I refer to these things as these are our cultural programmers, right? We're all creatures of our culture, and we are programmed by people and places and things within our culture, and our cultural programmers are our parents, our grandparents, our uncles, the stories we've heard, the music we've listened to. The proverbs that we've grown up with, you know, these are all cultural programmers that we're all creatures of, regardless of where you're from. And I think acknowledging that, I think, is really important. And so I think you're both right. You know, these and it triggers things, right? The essence of memory. It's the analogy I often use. You know, it's like getting a whiff of a smell, you know, on the wind, and it takes us back to a place. Right? That's cultural programming as well, in a way. You know, we hear something. Yeah, my grandmother used to say that, or I heard this, whatever, you know, and it takes us to a place. And I think that's what your book does.
And you said that, and I
people.
just remembered my grandmother's perfume.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I could see her as you spoke.
Yeah. I remember my first grade teacher, Miss Reed. As a matter of fact, there's someone I just saw on Facebook that I haven't seen in, okay, I'm dating myself now, about 30 years. And one of the first things he said is, "Do you remember Miss Reed?" And in that moment, I knew where we both went. And I said to him, "What do you think?" And he said, and we both said, "The bangles," right?
Yeah.
Her perfume,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And Hamlin, I like the term cultural programming. I will reference you every time that I say that so I can keep this job. But she modeled for us back then. She would bring her lunch into the classroom. She could have ate in the staff room, but she brought her lunch into the classroom, and she would spread her white tablecloth out on her desk, take out her knife and fork, and eat her lunch. So she modeled for us. I don't have to say to them, "Oh my gosh, da-da-da-da." I am modeling over lunch. So we knew how to eat with a knife and fork. If that was not a practice in your home, Miss Reed modeled that for you every lunchtime. And she'd fold the napkin. You knew that you could put the napkin up here. You knew you could put the napkin on your lap. Modeling. Cultural programming. Oh my gosh. So this is very, very, very excited. So now I want to go to the passion of gardening. I don't pretend to be a gardener. I think right now, though, between us and the world, I have the best garden on my block. I'm only just sharing. But I only have the best garden on my block because someone became, got their master horticulturalist certification, and they made a commitment to give 5 people in the community this gift of gardening over a 3-year period. So last year was the final year. And I really couldn't let them come to my house and think, oh my God, what is she doing? So I've been able to maintain. But when people talk about perennials and annuals and all of that stuff, I start to glaze over and, should I put the reds here and the green there? I think like, oh God, when I come back, make it look nice, no man. Too much, right? So tell me, what brought you into this passion of gardening? Is it something that is out of your childhood, or as you moved into the country here in Ontario, you thought, I would like to magnify my world with beauty? What brought you?
I think that we both Hamlin and I have shared this thing in common, which is that our mothers both believe that nobody's ever too busy or too poor to have a garden.
Wow.
And so I think at the busiest time when we had young children, we had amazing careers in television, and we started our garden. We bought a skinny little brick house in the East End of Toronto. And the first thing we did before we even sort of furnished the house is we started a garden. Of course, I started the flower garden and he started the vegetable and herb garden, because it just became really important to us to have that connection, I think, with the earth. And I think for you, growing things that we could use, the basil, the rosemary, the tarragon, the chives, the vegetables, that was really important. And for me, growing flowers reminded me of my own childhood, where my mother had a little jewel box of a garden below her bedroom window that was so small. It had 1 or 2 trees, and a multitude of the most beautiful flowers grew in this tiny garden. And to me, it was truly a treasure box. And it excited me at age 5 or 6 or 7. And so I always had that memory, and I always wanted to have, when we finally bought our first house, I wanted to have a flower garden.
Yeah, and I think for me, gardening, it reconnects. I can't speak for everyone else, but it reconnects me to the earth, and an appreciation of the earth, of the ground, right? So it literally and figuratively grounds me. And so for me, gardening is therapy for me sometimes. And there are times I'm working in a garden, and then Cynthia's there wanting to do this, and sometimes I have to tell her, could you just leave? This is my alone time. Just leave me alone. My alone time. I just want to be.
Can't you move that over there? Couldn't you move this over here?
Sometimes I just want to be alone.
Or do you just let that earth, your fingers go through that mud?
Oh,
yeah. It's that feeling, it's, and it's trying to figure it out as well. I mean, right now, the challenge in this garden that we have heavy soil, heavy clay soil. So we have to figure out a way to, how do I break up that heavy clay soil so other things can grow? And so we've got to mix it in with compost and sand and, and all these other things. So you're always finding ways of making the earth even better than what it is to grow a multiplicity of things. So it's a problem solving. Gardening is about solving problems at the end of the day. And it's, why is something not growing? Well, something, chances are you didn't give it a good chance. Okay, so let's problem solve. Okay, and gardening is really problem solving.
And for me, it's interesting because in the years when I couldn't garden, I realized what a role the garden played in helping me solve my own personal problems. I worked out a lot of my issues in the garden. It was a kind of meditation. Some people meditate and come out of it feeling better. They've worked something out almost miraculously. For me, gardening is a place where you can take your problems to the garden, and chances are by the time you have left that garden, having just played in the dirt, in the mud, as you say, Ita, or you've come away from there, and something is figured out.
And plants don't judge you. Like they're not, right?
They should sometimes.
There is no judgment. The plants don't judge, right?
But again, for educators too, or families and students viewing this, sometimes one day I asked my cousin, how did you get into IT? And she said, I like to read I used to read Nancy Drew, and Nancy Drew solved mysteries. Now, this is how I'm going to change out the conversation. I'm going to say, I was speaking to Cynthia and Hamlin said, gardening is problem solving. So educators, if you're listening to this, I really want you to think about this. This is a wonderful time where in your classroom, in your homes right now, over the internet, you can say to your students, you can have your garden. If you live in an apartment, there's the balcony gardening that's going on, and we can talk a little bit about that. You could, and Cynthia also pointed out, under her mother's window, these are her words, was a small garden. So you don't have to have a big garden. Sometimes these are the things that prevent us from doing things we think we got to have it big. But it can be small because it's still going to radiate that beauty. So for educators listening, what more can we do with growing and planting and seeing things like that as projects that we can do with our students to problem solve? We are also in a time, and I'm very glad that you raised this, about mindfulness. People, students, and everybody is looking for ways of how do we deal with mental issues, mindfulness. So if gardening is common, if planting a seed is going to bring that, teachers, I want you to take up the charge, and I want you to get your children and your students their hands in the mud and all that kind of good stuff, because it can speak to our wellness. Sister Soldier, in her first book, No Disrespect, says that when she was a teenager, a friend invited her to visit. And when she got to the friend's home, neighborhood, she thought, oh my God, they're trees. And in that moment as a young person, she thought, if you don't see anything grow, how would there be growth in a society? Because in her neighborhood, it was all concrete and cement. I've read that so many years ago, and that moment stays with me, that anytime that I'm going down a place and I see trees, I go right back to memory, to that cultural programming. Thank you, Hamlin. That the presence of green and things that grow elevates the human spirit. So love you for putting that within the context that planting and gardening can be problem solving. The next time I have a problem, I'm going outside and talk to my plants. Plants.
I strongly recommend talking to plants.
Yeah, but when they start talking back to you, then we have an issue. But you can talk to your plants.
Now see, you're going to get into big trouble with this, because any good storyteller will tell you that if you listen to the corn and the corn husk and fields, there's a lot of talking going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Conversation. I mean, here I've told everybody that I'm nervous talking to journalists, and a journalist has just pointed out to me that a storyteller would not hear a plant talk. Oh my gosh.
I thought, my mother always talked to her plants, and it was interesting. My mother bought some plants that were literally half dead. One was just on its last legs, and I watched her talk to this plant. She brought it home, she planted it, put it in good soil, and talked to this plant every day. And that plant did better than the other plants. The one that she talked to every day, and that was almost on its dying legs. So I think there's this thing that happens, this two-way communication between us and plants, and there's also a great sense of discovery, and I think that is so important for children and for adults, that sense of discovery that you get in a garden. And all you have to do is to look. Spring is the perfect time, but to walk and look at the various things coming up, that things that you didn't even plant. The birds dropped a seed. The air brought, the wind brought a seed. And it is so good for the soul to not have the same old, but to be discovering new things. One of the things that we did when we lived in our first home that we bought together was that Hamlin got a half barrel, filled it with potting soil, and we put seeds in. In fact, no, we had our older daughter, Nikisha. We had her plant the carrot seeds. And to watch that child's eyes, just to see her whole face, when she saw those seeds growing and growing and growing until there were tiny carrots, and then there were bigger carrots, and then there were big carrots. I'll never forget that. And we did the same thing with our younger daughter, Lauren, because that sense of discovery, that sense of learning that big things can come from little tiny seeds in the soil, right? That sense that you can do it, you can grow it yourself. That was her whole garden. I mean, there Hamlin had the lower level garden for his vegetable and herb garden, and I had the upper garden for my flowers and vines, but she had this half barrel, and that was her whole garden. And it was amazing to watch her dealing with this and tending it each day.
Yeah. And I think in a way, Ita, Cynthia, you talk about gardening as discovery. I think also gardening is also about hope, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
Because if, I remember, the story that you wrote about Mr. Moore, for example. Here's a man, he's pushing 80, pushing 90, and he's growing trees from a seed with no desire or hope that he's ever going to see it become a tree, but he's planting the seed, right? And I mean, having a garden, especially in the urban setting like downtown Toronto, where a lot of kids all they see is concrete. Having a garden, I think it gives some of them hope that you'll plant something and something good will come off it. So gardening,
and that garden can be just hope. A pot.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this. You're right. It doesn't have to be a plot of land. It can just be a small thing. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we struggle with. Something with big. Sometimes we want to remove ourselves from earth because now we are city urban people. We really didn't come to foreign to garden. We do not.
Yes, exactly.
All of those kind of things.
Yeah.
But I am particularly pleased though with the conversation because I'm just visualizing students. I'm visualizing the essence of this conversation to inspire teachers. If you were thinking of doing projects with planting or whatever, don't tell yourself, I've done it already, I've done it before. But in the time that we are in, this is a great way for expression. And it's something that you can do with others. And it's also something that you can do as an individual. So I'm going to do two things now. And for all those who are listening to ADBCC, the People's Residence, we are live with Cynthia Reyes and Hamlin Grange, and we're discussing gardening. We're discussing Cynthia's books, and in particular, Twigs in My Hair. One of the things that we had a moment of modeling and an example is when Cynthia was describing her daughter's excitement around carrots. And she said, and it grew bigger and bigger and bigger. Now you could see the storytelling. I want to turn the page. I want to know what's coming next, because a good story that tells well reads well. And so I'm going to invite you now, Cynthia, if you would read from the Twigs in My Hair and share that with our listeners.
Okay. So I have actually two stories, and maybe I could ask you to help me to choose one, because one of them is my relationship with Donald Moore, who was an elder in the Black community, and who was a prize-winning gardener, and who became my second gardening teacher. And the other one is about my childhood garden, my mother's garden. And so you choose.
Again, I'm going to choose Donald Moore. And right now it is not because of Barbadian ancestry. Because of Donald Moore.
Okay.
Because we are also too in moments of history. And
Right.
I'm speaking to with Hamlin Grange of History and Legacy of Bathurst Street. A different Booklist Cultural Center is located on Bathurst Street. And the influence too of Donald Moore is found and can be felt on Bathurst Street. So I'm leaning, loving your mother, Cynthia, but I'm leaning to Donald Moore right now.
All right. Here we go. All right. So I've met him, and I met him because I was president of the Black Business and Professional Association, and I decided that Donald Moore, once I heard about him and realized what he'd done for our community, he actually had led the charge that pressured our politicians to change immigration rules. So people like us are here in part because of his work and his passion for having fairer and more inclusive immigration laws. So I've met him through that and walked into his house and discovered he has this incredible garden and greenhouse. So here we go. One day, as a token of our friendship, I brought Mr. Moore a pink azalea. Some azaleas are hardy, surviving Canada's cold winters and putting out new flowers each spring. But I bought this one in a supermarket and learned from the tag that it was not recommended for outdoor planting. On a later visit, a year or so later, Mr. Moore was again in his greenhouse when I arrived. Smiling mysteriously, he beckoned me to come closer. "Remember this?" His long, slender fingers hugged a potted plant. The plant was full of blooms, pink blooms. That can't be. Is that the azalea I gave you, Mr. Moore?" "It is," he said, smiling proudly. He had tended it carefully, pruning, watering, and fertilizing, and here it was now with a profusion of blooms. It became a ritual. On every visit, I would step into the greenhouse to check up on the azalea, and Mr. Moore always smiled when I re-emerged. Our friendship developed and bloomed along with the azalea. After one visit, I tried to puzzle it out in my journal. My dearest gardening friends are decades older than me. Some, like Mr. Smith, I'd met through their gardens. Others, like Mr. Moore, I'd met in different circumstances, then discovered they were gardeners. However we met, we became good friends. Why is that? Is it because they're long retired, allowing them time to garden and develop a relationship with a young person who clearly wants to learn? But why did I grow to care so deeply for them? Was it because immigration separated me from the elderly members of my own family? Am I trying to find substitute grandfathers? I had never even seen a photo of my grandfathers. Both died before I was born. My maternal grandfather had been an inventor and a jeweler, and I always imagined him as being a tall, thin man with nimble fingers, but I didn't know that for sure. I didn't even know if either grandfather liked flowers or liked to plant things. No, I wrote, Mr. Smith and Mr. Moore are both elderly, tall and thin, but they won me over on their own merits, particularly their love of gardening. And anyway, I speculated to my journal, maybe the answers are both simpler and more profound at the same time. Gardening touches something elemental within the gardener. The airs and pretenses we put on in the workplace or at social events don't stand a chance when you're kneeling on the ground, sweat rolling from your forehead, all 10 fingers grimy, dirt on your cheeks, and twigs in your hair.
Fantastic, fantastic. So Hamlin, you supplied or provided you're the storyteller with the photographs in the book.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that process. Did you agree? No, Hamlin, not that photograph, the other photograph. I think, how did you work on that, and what was that process like?
Well, the process was that, I take photographs simply because I just like taking pictures. And for me, a photograph is really capturing a moment in time. And so it's capturing a moment in the garden, where there's a flower or a hummingbird at a flower, or whatever that moment is. But my photographs were never intended. I never took photographs because they were going to be published. In fact, I resisted having my name even attached to the book on the cover, to be honest with you. And Cynthia and the editors had to convince me that I should put my name on the book. But the process of going through all of these photographs that appear in the book, but also the ones that don't appear, it was a bit arduous, because Cynthia to this day believes that some of my best photographs did not appear in the book, because I didn't have the time to go through all of them. But the process really is about, the photographs should be able to capture and enhance the words within the book. You know, they say, you know, a photograph is worth 1,000 words. That's saying. So what do you say when your photographs are accompanied by thousands of words, right? It made my photographs look even better, to be honest with you. And so the process for me was, how can I complement the words, beautiful words, because Cynthia, she's such a good writer. How do I complement those words with photographs? Because photographs should be emotive, right? It should stir an emotion in us when you look at it, whether it's an emotion of mystery, or complete joy, or astonishment, right? Or even just calmness, right? So the photographs should enhance the emotion that the words bring to it. And so that was the process we went through.
But you know, what's interesting is this. I mentioned earlier that all throughout my life, I've been writing stories about our family and our homes and our gardens. And pretty well all throughout the time, well, the entire time I've known him, he's been taking pictures, documenting our life with pictures, and documenting our homes and our lives outside our homes with pictures. He had so many pictures. And sometimes the stories that your pictures told were different from the stories that my words told. Yeah. But often they were similar or the same. And it was interesting what happened when we were able to pull together those pictures to complement the words. And there's one picture that I have, and I think it's I have here in the book open in front of me, and I think it's the first
part one. Yeah, it's
in part one. It's the picture that illustrates part one at the beginning of the story. And if you look at this picture, first you see green, then you see light, then you see shadows.
You can actually hold it up. We're doing video. That's just television.
And then in the middle, and you can't see it as well here, but in the middle, there's a grand white arbor. And going up the arbor are these light purple flowers. Take that, could you? Yeah, these light purple flowers. But when you look at it, as I'm looking at it now, I'm looking at the sunlit spaces on the lawn, and I'm looking at the shadow around it. And what it suggests to me is that there's a path, there's a garden path, and that if you follow this garden path, something mysterious and interesting and happy will happen. And the truth is, that's gardening. When you have a garden, not everything should be revealed at one first glance. A garden should have paths that encourage you to follow those paths, because around the corner will be a delightful discovery. And so you don't plant everything just one-dimensional. You make sure that there are curves, and you make sure that they're interesting, almost signposts, but in shrubs and flowers and greenery. It's a come hither to the person who's taking the path, right? And there's a sense of mystery and discovery, always discovery. I keep coming back to that with gardening. And that picture for me does it.
I have confessions to make. In the past, I would plant all the plants in, and I'd like come down the next day and think like, boom, I think that you all should be up together. Like, what do you mean? I think the ones over there, of course, I'm saying the red ones and the like the red books and the blue books. I'm going the red plants and the yellow plants. Come on. You gotta like be tall like the other plants. Until the woman who gave me the gift of gardening came into my life and said things like, these will come up first, and then later on you can appreciate these other things coming up. And I'm standing there thinking, oh my God, I feel like an idiot. I'm thinking like everything comes up together. And then I remember my grandmother in Barbados was a gardener. She was known for palms, and she was known for crotons.
Yes. Oh yes, crotons.
And what my grandmother was sharp when she saw the hotel industry, the tourist economy explode in Barbados. And she was a woman who always had to have the rainy day bosom money. Mm-hmm. And so she would plant anthurium lilies, crotons, and all ferns and palms. Yes. And those were the things that the hotels would buy in. Now, well, today they're landscape people and all of that thing going on. But that was one of my grandmother's side hustles,
Great.
Yes, responding. So for those who are listening, no, they don't all come up at the same time. Or maybe I'm the only person in the world that
we all start out that way. Like, who has a clue, right? Like, who knows what it's going to look like? It's all from trial and error. I remember when I first started gardening, I would sort of plant everything in a row, like soldiers lined up. And I think it was Mr. Smith, or maybe Mr. Moore, but one of my first gardening teachers who said, oh, no. You have to sort of grow them like in a bunch like that, right? And then you have to think about the colors, and you don't want, like yellow and white and blue and red and orange and everything all mixed up,
It's the carnival garden, like who's the color? Right? But again, for children, students, educators, this is fantastic. Here we are now talking mathematics. And these are all the things that I see. So there is a wall, and I like to reference there. There is a wall in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it's a wall of a school with children with special needs. And on the wall it says, all children are gifted. Some open their presents later. Whoa.
I love that.
Whoa. I must pass that place like a zillion times just to read that stuff. And I have referenced it. So again, your discovery, things open up all the time. And then in terms of education, some students open their presents on different days. So while we're and this is the power of books. This is the power of when people are passionate about what they do and they document it. You've got Donald Moore in your books. My mother of 87 came as one of the first domestics because of Donald Moore, So here again, too, with Twigs in My Ear, in a good home, in all your books, you're bringing history, you're bringing, as Hamlin would say, our cultural programmers, the role of memory, and throughout your books, I see where there are incidents in your childhood, and then you have a eureka moment in your adult life, and that takes us back. To that moment.
We're always learning. I don't even remember with that first book, I grew up disliking my grandmother intensely because she seemed very hard and very cold. And I had no idea of what had made her that way. Yes. And then when I became a teenager and ran away from home, I ran away from home to live with my grandmother. And everybody laughed at school. They said, you don't run away from home and go live with your grandmother. But that's who I ended up going to. And I adored her. I grew to understand her and to love her. And we became as thick as thieves. We were the closest friends. I learned so much from going back. And if you notice in my books, sometimes I introduce characters that seem very harsh or cruel. And I always go back to see if there's another side of them that I missed. because that's important to me. It's important for us to know that somebody that you may not like when you're a child actually may be a pretty terrific person. And that if you give them a chance and you get to know them when you yourself are older, you might find that that person has something to teach you. My grandmother taught me a great deal.
What I know we're getting there, but two things I'm curious about. First, I'm curious about what is it that you're working on next, or that seed that is planted right now in your hearts and in your imagination. And my second question is, what kind of world do you imagine and see us living in this post-COVID period?
So I'm going to let you take the second one, and I'll take the first
Sure.
one. There's something that I forgot to mention about the writing of Twigs, because I'm not actually sure what memoir I'm going to work on next. I'm working on a work of fiction. I'm not prepared to talk about it just yet because I'm still figuring the plot out. And Lauren and I have actually written the fourth Myrtle the Purple Turtle book, which is now being illustrated by our illustrator in South Africa. With Twigs in My Hair, one of the reasons that I was so proud when it was published is because gardening, just like having a beautiful home or being interested in the history of Canadian homes and who lived there and so on, those things are seen as white Canadian endeavors. We associate books about gardening with white gardeners. We associate books about beautiful historic homes and modern homes and so on with white homeowners. And it was very important to me as a woman of color and us as a family of color to show that Black families also have an interest in these things. We have a stake in this country, whether it's living on a farm. We lived on a 100-acre farm that was from Hamlin's side of the family. And yeah, we were Black farmers, you know. We've lived in the country, in various parts of the country. We've lived in small villages, and we've lived in the city. And now we're kind of semi-country again, because our hearts are in the country. But it's really important, I think, to show that we as Black people also represent and contain the range of humanity. We're not just one thing. And I was really proud of Twigs in My Hair and the fact that a Black couple collaborated on this, and this was our gardening story, because the only other gardening books I could find written by Black people were one by Alice Walker, I think it's called In My Mother's Garden, something like that, and one by Jamaica Kincaid. I could not find any other gardening books by Black gardeners. So for me, this is a stake in the ground, so to speak, with the publication of Twigs in My Hair.
And even if we were to look at gardening books coming out of the Caribbean, there are always gardens about either the botanical gardens or it's some lavish property. And I am very, very pleased that you brought that point out, because sometimes that's the disconnect. We come here and garden is a thing back we do back home, but we can't do it now, and it's a white people thing and all that kind of madness. You know, and I guess sometimes we are afraid to pamper ourselves, to appreciate the things that have beauty. There's almost like beauty is for some people, but not for everybody, you know, and then we put that on ourselves. So excellent point in bringing that out again. And I am happy that you brought it out, because if we plant more, then our sense of identity and our rootedness, you know, so you're even making me think and reimagine what gardening can do. And so fantastic. So Hamlin, the world we live in.
Well, you know, it is such a fundamental question you ask. What happens after? What happens now? Everybody's asking that question, and there's a little bit of an irony. I was thinking about this today because of some work I'm working on right now. The irony of this pandemic, of COVID-19, is that this virus amplifies the pre-existing conditions that individuals have in our health. Think about this for a minute. This virus amplifies that. If you have diabetes, if you're obese, if you have high blood pressure, if you have hypertension, all ailments that our people have, and we know the numbers, it amplifies that and it will kill you. Ironically, this pandemic, I believe, has also amplified the pre-existing conditions in our society. The way we treat our elderly. Look at all those people who have died in nursing homes. The way our education system, it has amplified the weaknesses in that. It has amplified the weaknesses in how we relate to each other. It has amplified the weaknesses in our court system, in so many systems. In the overcrowded prisons, for example, it's amplified the weakness in that. And so in a way, COVID-19, if we don't pay attention to this and we go back to where we were before COVID-19, we would not have learned anything. And that's my concern. So moving forward, I think the future after COVID-19 is that we will become uber aware of these weaknesses. We will become more mindful of the fact that our, the personal support workers that are affected are people of color, mostly women of color. And the reason why they're affected is because they're low paying and they have to work multiple jobs. That's a weakness in our system. And we cannot go back there.
They're not valued.
They're not valued.
Yeah,
okay?
It's interesting how the frontline and essential workers have become, in a way, the heroes of this pandemic.
Exactly.
And yet they're the ones who often are undervalued, underappreciated, and underpaid, and are often people of color and immigrants.
Exactly, exactly. So the future, I think, it will change. It will change how we look at ourselves, look at our world. I'm hoping that we will have greater empathy. But there's also a real risk here, Aja, that we will cocoon. We will, we will go back into our tight little enclaves to protect ourselves, because we will start blaming other groups for what happened. That's the danger, and we need to be mindful of that as well. So I'm both optimistic, but I'm also very cautious about what the future will bring for us.
I thank you for your words, and I thank you for your thoughts. And again, I've had the opportunity for the last hour to speak with Cynthia Reyes and Hamlin Grange. Cynthia, the author of A Good Home, An Honest House. I promise that she's going to be back. I know Lauren is going to be coming to share the stories of Myrtle the purple turtle. But I also know that Cynthia at some time is probably going to do a read-in of Myrtle the purple turtle. Thank you for reminding us to look to nature as nature has spoken to the world at this time. Thank you for reminding us not only about the beauty of gardening, but also about the solace that it can bring to us, the things that we can do that can impact our wellness and our well-being, the simplicity of it. I thank you just for having fun with you this afternoon. And as I said, I'm in the presence of trailblazers, of game changers. This is not a time where I'm like amping you up, but genuinely the things that you have contributed to this society has propelled all Canadians, not just the Black community, but all Canadians. And for that, we are thankful. And I'm thankful that even in this conversation, you've brought the histories of those who have gone before. You've reminded us about the wisdom in Indigenous knowledge. That's also what I'm thankful for. And the thing that thrills me is what you shared almost to the end, that gardening is people's business. One person business is everybody business. And Hamlin said, we may live in the world where people may choose to go into their corner. But what we know from plants plants kind of populate because the wind brings the seeds, the birds drop the seeds, we bring the seeds, and then, hey, trees grow, and voila, we too have twigs and are here. So this has been a fantastic opportunity to speak to both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Totally enjoyed it.
Totally enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you.